Hi there. Welcome to this presentation on reference data as a service using CDM. My name is Tabish Ahmed, and I'm a Director of Product at ISDA, the International Swaps and Derivatives Association. And I'm here today with technology partners at TradeHeader. Marc, if you want to go. Cristina.
My name is Cristina, and I'm a software developer at TradeHeader.
Hi, I'm Marc Gratacos. I'm a managing partner at TradeHeader.
Thanks. So just to give you some background on what we're going to demonstrate and hopefully present today, we have a reference data service implementation. It's a POC, and it's basically a small project at the moment to agree and develop and distribute machine-readable versions of the ISDA Floating Rate Matrix. So this is reference data at the moment, which is handled in a file format, and it's not standardized as such, and we want to try and get a representation in CDM and to allow the distribution of it to industry participants using an API. So some background, in 2021 the FPML Standards Committee, they agreed to develop and distribute this project, and the reference data option that we went for was the floating rate indices. There are other use cases as well, but over the last year or so, we developed with TradeHeader a solution, interim solution for exposing those floating rate options metadata using an API, and behind that sits CDM, so it's reference data service API using CDM. And we want to try and demonstrate that to you today with a floating amount calculator demonstration. And I'll hand over to Cristina and Marc to take you through this.
Okay, thanks, Tabish. So what we have done is we have a process in place that from which we are generating the CDM. In this case, what we have is we are generating the reference data from a spreadsheet. The legal team at ISDA defines the legal definitions and generates a set of legal documents. And from that, we are generating the floating rate options. These are the indices that are part of most of the derivative contracts for interest rates. And these are a critical piece of the interest rates derivatives markets. The current process generates the FROs from a spreadsheet, and what we have done is that spreadsheet is kind of the central piece in which we maintain the FROs, and we generate the CDM from that. The CDM, we are able to validate that using a service that validates CDM. And once that has been validated, we store that in a database, in a DynamoDB. We provide an API that gets consumed by multiple agents, and we'll see some examples today in the presentation. The whole point about this is that we're able to standardize the reference data information in using CDM, and we're able to consume that data in a set of particular use cases. Okay. An important point here is that once the information has been standardized, we're able to produce that in multiple formats. So we're able to generate XML, and that's been used by FPML to generate a set of reference data on the FPML standard. But also we're able to fit multiple applications like validation tools and a cash flow calculator, which is an application that Cristina will show you. Okay. The format that we are storing the information in the DynamoDB, in the database, it's the CDM JSON format. So it's in a JSON application. So this is the current landscape that we have in the production these floating rate options with metadata. In the future landscape, we plan to replace this spreadsheet with an advanced UI feature. So it's very similar scenario, but the idea would be to replace the spreadsheet with an advanced UI that can manage the generation of the FROs and also the production of the different outputs that we are generating from. Okay. On today's session, I'm going to focus on the first part, which is the generation of the FROs in CDM using the spreadsheet. And we're going to see two things. One is the validation of the CDM using an external data validator, which is another web service. And secondly will be to store the information in a database that will be consumed afterwards by a cash flow calculator. Okay. This information is relevant because it contains information such as whether the index is an OIS index, what's the lifetime of the index, whether it's included in multiple legal definitions. So all this metadata is information that can be used in multiple applications. So we'll see one, which is going to be the cash flow calculator, but you can imagine in firms that use that for validation, data validation, but could be used in risk applications. So there are multiple applications out there that can be leveraged using this information that we have in the database. Okay. Let me show you a quick demo on the actual generation of the CDM from the spreadsheet. So let me skip this. Okay, so this is the spreadsheet that we manage currently. As you can see, as you can see, the spreadsheet contains a list of indices, and for each one of the indices, we have a set of metadata, like the default currency, the region of the index, whether it has been included in multiple legal documents, the mapping to, for example, ISO codes. So all this information is additional metadata that we have beyond the pure name of the index. And this information is valuable for different applications, and we'll see the cash flow one being one, but we can use that in multiple scenarios. What we have done is we have expanded the functionality of the spreadsheet, and we have the ability to generate the CDM from this, but also to validate that CDM and being able to upload that CDM to the DynamoDB in Amazon. So let me just show the demo. So we have these buttons on the top, which are basically plugins that we have added to the spreadsheet to be able to manage all this process. So we have the FROs with the different names. These are the legal names that we use, and we can validate them. So we can select the ones that we want to validate. And what we're doing here is we're generating the JSON CDM, and we are validating against the CDM model that is available as part of the open source contribution. So we see that there is an error in this case. We can get the error messages on the actual CDM for the index. And we see that we are missing an identifier on the contractual definition, so there is some information missing on the row that we need to fill in before we submit this to the database. We also check. We can also see that there is a minimum information that is missing, so we are missing some information. We can actually upload this, so we can select the FROs that we want to upload to the database, and just basically upload them. So now what we have is we have submitted all these FROs to the DynamoDB, and we can use these FROs now on the downstream application. So we are pretty much set. Again, the advantage of this is that all the validation code is part of the CDM definition. A CDM being a functional language is not only the data model of these FROs, of these indices, but also all the functional aspect in terms of data validation that support those indices. So this is a critical piece of the CDM, the ability not only to provide a standard data model for this information, but also to validate that information. So we are just embedding that CDM component in an external validator, and we are using that validator to control the quality of this metadata that we are producing using this Excel. I'll go back to the slides. So we have seen the production of the FROs with the metadata. Let's look at the consumer's part. Let's look at how applications can use these FROs with the metadata to do things that bring value to the firms. So one of them is a cash flow calculator. The idea here is to leverage the CDM code that is available to be able to calculate cash flows for interest rate swaps. Okay, so all the code is available as part of the open source repository. And what we're going to do is we're going to check, we're going to have a web service that is a calculator. That calculator will call the DynamoDB to get information on the index, to see whether the index is an OIS index or not, what type of default currency it has, and so on. It's going to use that metadata information of the index to calculate the cash flows for a specific trade. Okay, and we're going to see a trade display around the different observations with the different cash flows. We're going to use static data for the actual values of the index. So we are not connecting to a market data provider in this case, but we could potentially. For this prototype, we are using just static data for the actual values of the rates. But the actual implementation of the service, of the calculated service, is using the standard CDM components that we have available. So what's the process? Just let me show you a sequence diagram. The process is that the user will submit a trade in CDM format to the calculator. The calculator will call the reference data API to know what type of FRO it is, whether it's OIS or not. And the reference data API will provide that information of the metadata that we have uploaded using the spreadsheet. Connecting to the DynamoDB, we'll get back the results of the metadata, and the calculator will perform all the cash flow calculations for that particular transaction, for that particular trade, and we'll return back the CDM enriched with all the cash flows that are expected for that particular transaction. Okay, so here what we have is a set of web services that provide certain functionality and make use of the reference data that we have provided as part of the ISDA production of floating rate options. Okay, so I'm going to pass it to my colleague Cristina. She'll show you the actual web service of the cash flow calculations. Over to you, Cristina.
Mark, is the another one?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Computer. Sorry about this.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I will now introduce the user interface we have created for this project. The UI consists of 4 different tabs. The first one, floating rate options data, releases, which is related to the first one, OIS calculator, and code list validator. Firstly, floating rate options data contains a table with all the floating rate options ordered alphabetically by name. And each floating rate option has a version, a currency, a category, and a latest updated version column. It also has a validate column with a button that, when clicked, validates this floating rate option against the CDM structure. We have also added some pagination to make the navigation easy between these floating rate options. And on the left, for each of these floating rate options, we have an expandable button that, when clicked, displays 2 more options: show float rate option or show validations. This is disabled until we validate this floating rate option. Once the validation is done, we can click this button and we will see all of them in a tabular form. Then if we click the other one, we can see the information in a more visual, appealing format. We have also added some filters. The first is basically a search that allows us to filter floating rate options by name. We can type in, for example, AUT, and the table will be updated with only those floating rate options that start with AUT. We have also the option to reset this search. Then on the right, we have an icon that allows us to add other filters, such as filter if they are active or inactive, by their category, currency, or release. We can choose, for example, one currency and click Save, and the table will be updated with only those floating rate options that fulfill this condition. We have also this button that if we click it, will reset this table. Now we go to the Releases tab that is very similar to the first tab. We have a table with all the releases, and for each release we have a scheme version, a scheme publication date, some notes, the status of release, the author, the floating rate options counter, and a button that when clicked takes us to the previous tab and makes the filter by release automatically so that we can only see those floating rate options contained in this release. Now I'm going to show you an application of the floating rate options using a calculator from cash flows from trades. This part has three different tabs. The first one is the Blue Add New Trade that allow us to choose a new trade and display the result from the calculator. And then we have two more tabs, the YS Swap and Vanilla Swap, that basically take a default trade and display the result. Once we see this alert, it means that we are now able to go to one of these two tabs. For example, the YS Swap. This one takes the default YS Swap trade and displays the information about this trade, the cash flows in tabular form, and we have also a calculation details button that when clicked displays all the calculations in a table for easier viewing. Now we can go to the Vanilla Swap that operates similarly to the OIS Swap tab, but in this case it handles the default Vanilla Swap trade. And we can see that the information is displayed and also the cash flows. But in this case the calculation details is disabled since there are no calculations available to display. Now if we go to the Blue Add New Trade, we can choose a new trade. For example, we choose an OIS Swap, and now we are able to see the trade details, the cash flows, and in this case the calculation details. And finally, we go to the code list validator that basically you have a drag and drop or browse. And here we can drag and drop or browse some trades in JSON format. Once we have uploaded them, we can validate it. And we will go to the next view. Once they are validated, they will be shown on the left as buttons with a badge. The red badge with a number, in this case 101, it means that there are errors, and the green badge with a 0, it means that there are no errors. We have also two more options, such as add files or remove all files. If we click the first one, it displays a view with an export button that basically downloads the response in JSON format, and we have also a validation context container, an errors container, but in this case there are no errors, and on the right we have the input JSON file that we have uploaded. If we go to the other button, the view is exactly the same, but in this case we have a currency error, and it gives us also another information such as the path. And with this path we are able to locate the error on the input JSON file on the right. For example, we are able to see that in this case the currency that we have doesn't exist. And that's all we got, and with that we conclude our demo. Thanks.
Switch the slides.
Thank you, Cristina.
You show the slides.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cristina and Mark. We hope you found that demonstration very useful. I certainly did. And it's really, there are a lot of enhancements that can be done. This is just one example, I guess, in terms of showing how reference data the example that we've covered for the floating rate options, can actually leverage CDM and a service API to be able to get access to that in a standardized way, and then to incorporate it in different use cases. And the example that we covered today was the floating amount calculator. But as you can see on the slide deck, there are additional data sets, high priority data sets, for the different asset classes. You've got business centers, currencies, other indices, settlement rate options, a bunch of stuff. And it would be good to be able to see some of these, I think, following the same path. You'll see a QR code on the screen, and we would all appreciate if you could take that survey. It's a reference data survey, and the results will be shared with ISDA to help us understand from the feedback that we get in terms of interaction with the industry. And lastly, really, I missed it on the first slide, it was really trying to validate this concept with financial institutions. So if you are from a firm and you're interested in trying to use this feature, we'd really appreciate you reaching out to us to try and get that validation put in place. Anything else to add, Marc, Cristina?
I think that's it. I think we want to validate with the industry whether we can use this for firms to be able to use that metadata that ISDA publishes and to facilitate that consumption in downstream systems. I think that's the main idea.
Thanks. And that brings us to any questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Hi.
I'm not massively familiar with the CDM yet, but did it already support the data structures you needed, or did you need to work with FINOS to get the data domain model changed?
Yeah, so the question is whether CDM already supported the data structures, or if we had to work with FINOS to get the data model changed. Marc?
Yeah, I'll take this one. Yeah, we had some data structures already available as part of the CDM model. We had to extend them and contribute back to the model. So some of the metadata fields were already there, but we had to expand that to support all the different data points that we wanted to cover.
Sorry, I'm receiving in the back. Quick question, just for my understanding, is the demo is of the tool, is there going to be like multiple sources of information and then the ID from out of its CDM can be consumed from a single place, or is it a singular, or is the expectation of data being available in that format to be consumed, like a single place where all data to be stored and consumed? I'm just trying to understand the data flow, if you will, of the use of CDM.
I think from the CDM side, the idea is to provide a standardized data model and a standardized set of functions that you can use to consume that data. From this implementation, we are looking to centralize that metadata, so we have multiple consumers to that central database. But from an open source perspective, I think the idea is that we provide the open source representation of that data model, but also all the functions to be able to calculate cash flows, to validate that data, to be able to consume that data in multiple implementations. So I think there are the two aspects of this. For the implementation, we are looking to centralize the data and consume it from different systems. But the open source component is basically around standardization of this data model, but also providing the functions to validate and to consume the data in the cash flows.
Okay, we do have a booth outside just on the left-hand side, CDM table. So if there are any further questions, we are available. And if you are interested in learning more about the API and potentially linking up and using the data, then that will be very welcome as well. Okay, thank you.